Hello and welcome to the Cult is King podcast. I am your host, Rambling Bones, joined as ever by my co-host, the Duke.
His long-suffering co-host.
Yeah, and today we watched House of the Long Shadows, a movie that I found on a complete whim, but I saw the names John Carradine, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and Vincent Price, and so it had to be great.
What, Desi Arnaz Jr. wasn't the big selling point for you?
Well, at first I only saw the name Desi Arnaz, and I was like, why is Ricky here? But it was Junior, of course. Just like how those four names drew me in, I would say if seeing a movie with those four names would draw you in, you should 100% watch this movie before listening to us talk about it.
Yes, so this podcast, we can't avoid major spoilers because you can't talk about this movie without talking about all of its twists and turns. So we've kind of got to just lay it all out and go a little more in depth with the synopsis than we usually do. So I will say, I'm going to echo Bones here. If you think that you might enjoy this movie, if you want to see a movie that has all four of those actors in it, 5 if you're a Desi Arnaz Jr. fan, you should watch it, and then you should come back to us because I don't know how to review this without just laying it all out there.
And honestly, if you're watching any podcast that has any sort of movie you haven't seen, you should just assume that the plot is going to be completely ruined for you. So it's not our fault.
Yeah, get off of TikTok and go watch a movie for a change.
We are not on TikTok, Duke. But here is the synopsis. You have the main character named Kenneth, and he is a writer. He and his publisher make a little bet. For $20,000, Kenneth is going to attempt to write a novel in the style, pretty much on the level of like Wuthering Heights. He has to do it in one night. So the publisher, since Kenneth needs a place with atmosphere to write, of course, sets him up with a Welsh manor called Baldpate Manor.
Or at least that's how they pronounce it. It's in Welsh, so it's all B's and Y's and W's.
Yeah, I think they only pronounce it that way once in the movie. This movie's based off of a play, which is based off of a book that is called 7 Keys to Baldpate. So I'm going with the name Baldpate Manor.
And even funnier, this is the 7th adaptation of that book.
Of 7 Keys.
Right.
So, Kenneth, he goes to the manor. Nobody's supposed to be there. So, of course, people are there. You have 2 caretakers, and then a mysterious woman shows up. Mysterious woman is the publisher's like secretary, and she's been sent to derail Kenneth's ability to write a novel. The caretakers, however, are not actually the caretakers. They are the former owner, Lord Grisbane, and his daughter Victoria. Then Peter Cushing shows up, and he is another Grisbane. And then Vincent Price shows up, and he is another Grisbane. And then Christopher Lee shows up. He is not a Grisbane. He is a prospective buyer named Corrigan. Now, they don't reveal the Grisbanes outright, but Kenneth is very confused why people keep showing up at his abandoned manor that nobody's supposed to be at, and does the most mild amount of detective work before it is spit out that the Grisbanes are, well, at first they sort of play it off as being a family reunion, but there is a much more grand reason they are there.
You see, there was a scandal in the Brisbane family where the youngest son,
Roderick,
committed an unspeakable act, and was therefore, they decided to deal with it themselves by locking him up, where he has been for the last, 40 years?
Yep. They locked him up at 14 and for killing a woman. And so they locked him up, and his sentence is up, and the family's getting together for an old let's let the youngest boy out of the tower ceremony, I guess.
Unfortunately for them, he's already out.
He is out. And after that, the family starts getting picked off one by one. And then some like backpackers show up and they also get picked off.
Yeah, they're not important.
As soon as they arrived, I was like, oh, they can't just kill off all of the big name actors immediately. So we needed these two to come in and also get picked off.
Well, and they weren't particularly likable, so,
Yeah.
they were good victims.
Now, here's where we get into the first twist.
One of three.
Corrigan is actually Roderick. He had escaped forever ago, and literally his explanation is he kept showing back up every now and then just to... Because Victoria, she would like feed him, so I guess he would come back around feeding time or something. It's not really explained.
The point is they thought he's been locked up all this time, but he's been coming and going as he pleases.
Yes, and he'd been planning this, and so he's been picking everyone off. But here's the next twist. He didn't actually kill that girl when he was 14. It was Vincent Price, who plays Lionel Grisbane. Vincent Price had killed that girl and had laid the blame on Roderick.
That doesn't stop Roderick, though, from murdering Vincent and then going to try to murder our good friend Desi Arnaz Jr.
Yeah, Lee literally kills his entire family, and then Vincent Price, he doesn't try to clear his name. He's just got to kill them all. And then he tries to kill the secretary love interest and Desi Arnaz Jr.
And then comes the really big twist. You see, he falls down on the axe.
Yes, he's got this big axe, and he
medieval battle axe.
He falls on it.
And Desi Arnaz Jr. watches him die, and then he watches him stand back up.
And then he watches every single killed person come in to the living room or the foyer, whatever it is. And then the publisher shows up.
You see, this whole grisly night of murder, and there were some parts that were grisly, I would say, it was just a prank, bro. Desi Arnaz Jr.'s character is like a very cynical writer.
He's a cynical writer, and you're sort of led to believe at the beginning that he writes sort of like crap. What started this whole bet off was a discussion about whether love exists or not, and the publisher's like, whatever happened to Charles Dickens in books like Wuthering Heights, and Desi Arnaz, he's a cynic. He doesn't believe in that stuff, and so the publisher, to prove a point about love,
about drama and feeling.
There was a lot of things he was trying to prove a point about, but it seemed like they really tackled that love thing, and I was really questioning whether that was granted.
He does fall in love with the secretary, which is even funnier because the secretary was just playing a part and actually has a husband.
Yes.
Well, sort of.
Here comes twist number 2.
Well, I guess we're on 4 now. I said 3. I guess we're on twist 4.
It doesn't matter. Here comes the
twist of the knife.
The most perfect of the twist. None of that happened. He went to the manor. He wrote the book. This was the book.
The book was about the bet he made with his publisher, and then the publisher's the whole murder, and then the publisher in general, like playing this trick on him. That was all part of the book.
Yes.
So not only was the murders not real, but the murders being staged wasn't real either.
And then the final little twist is he meets the girl's real, of course. Her name isn't whatever she said her name was. And Vincent Price is a waiter.
Yes. And then...
Not that twist matters or anything.
Well, I'm of the belief when making a movie that more Vincent Price is always okay.
This is where I'd like to pivot from talking about this movie to talking about a little show called Tales from the Dark Side. So,
a personal favorite of both mine and Bones.
Me and the Duke have watched every single episode of this show. And the show is... Its main factor is that the writing is insane. And there seems to always... Maybe not always be a twist, But a game we would play is we would shout out just endings. Like, we would write the end of the story before we got there, like at the beginning. And on more than one occasion, the crazy, insane thing we would shout out would happen.
And here's the thing. You don't get the feeling it was a predictable show. It wasn't. The fun of the show was you could get a really well-written ending, a really bad ending, or this crazy thing that you shouted out as a joke because no episode would ever end that way would sometimes be the ending.
Now, here's how this show ties back in. At the start of the movie, the Duke said, "What if it's just the publisher screwing with him the entire time?" And I said, "What if it's all just his book?" And we were both right. Sort of. We both said it as like a joke. We really...
Yeah, here's the thing. We guessed the ending and were still surprised by it both times.
And the thing is I don't know how you were, Duke, but at the ending, I wasn't angry. I was just bewildered. Like, it didn't... Maybe if I hadn't seen all of Tales from the Dark Side, it'd be a movie where I would be mad at the ending. But after, I guess, being exposed to so much of this kind of twist ending, it really just didn't faze me other than, like, this movie was good. Why was that at the end?
Well, and that was the thing. Like, at first I was like, really? And then they twisted it again, and I'm like, well, you got me twice. So, I don't know. I mean, in some ways it makes the movie more memorable, but it's very strange because if you take the movie just for being the murder plot and take away the last two twists, it's a good movie of that type. Maybe it has some, maybe it's a little tropey,
I think,
but it's like a good example of like an old dark house type movie.
It's definitely a movie with some flaws. I think the first flaw for me is the main character, Desi Arnaz Jr. So the movie is listed as a horror comedy. It's mildly amusing at best on the comedic side, and I'm not sure if that's a writing or just his acting, but I really did not care about Kenneth.
It was going to be an uphill battle for him anyway, because the reason, if you look at the movie poster, you're not going to see
him. You're not going to see the main character on the movie poster.
You're going to see, the selling point was that we have booked John Carradine, Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, and Peter Cushing, and even though they're all, past the prime of their careers, they're all still like the mega stars of horror, and we've put them all into one movie.
Yeah.
The other problem with it being a horror comedy is, for the most part, the first 3/4 of the movies plays everything completely straight.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's like amusing, but they never really go into the super jokey joke area. There's sort of a pacing problem as well. Like, I almost feel like the first 30 minutes...
It's a very slow burn.
Well, it's a slow burn up until you finally get everyone in the house, and then the movie really picks up, and that's when I started to really enjoy it. But prior to that, it's kind of slow. Your main character is not that great, and this is the writing. The writing is very much like a writer patting himself on the back the whole time.
Yes, when we were watching this, and we're getting to the point where he's talking to his publisher about what a great story it was.
Oh, yeah, at the very end, it's like, oh, such a great story. I learned so much.
I thank you for this. I see everything differently now. I won't say what I actually said, but I essentially turned to Bones and was like, the movie is very congratulatory of itself.
Yes, it's a writer kissing himself in the mirror. And throughout the whole movie, it's not quite like that, but every now and then Desi Arnaz will like, yes, this trope. And I hate that in movies. The only movie I've seen that pointed out tropes that I liked were like the Scream movies.
Yes.
But other than that, when a movie tries to be... This movie doesn't go as far as referential, but, it's like, we've seen movies too, and we know you've seen movies. It's like don't do that, stop it.
Yeah, no, the thing that I was enjoying them at one point, but the thing that ultimately killed a lot of the modern, like, Marvel movies for me is that looking into the camera, winking, and being like, well, that happened.
And I just, the writing aspect there is really frustrating. There's also sort of a tone shift in the movie, again, once you get past the first 30 minutes, because there's a little bit of gore in this movie.
Yes, I was surprised. One of the moments, there's a part where one of the hikers is going to clean her face in a water bin, and it's been replaced with acid, and it's a little gory, but the part that always sticks to me is when not Peter Cushing, when Christopher Lee is killing Vincent Price with the battle axe. You don't actually see, like, the battle axe going in, but when he lifts it up, you see the blood and the hair stuck to the axe.
And that was something that...
It was a nice touch.
It was a nice touch, but I was also confused a bit why they didn't show it, because they did show some pretty gory stuff, and this movie is a canon picture. If you don't know what canon is, it is maybe the greatest film company to ever become defunct ever.
Think of, like, Avery, like, the trash tier, but awesome, like, blockbusters with, like, Sylvester Stallone and, like...
Over the top, Masters of the Universe, Death Wish 3, and probably...
I believe Missing in Action also, was it not?
They might have done Missing in Action. I mean,
they did a couple Chuck Norris flicks.
They did a lot of Chuck Norris flicks.
Cobra.
Literally, it's amazing that they went defunct. I don't understand it. It was a perfect company that never did anything wrong ever.
Well, it probably doesn't help that it was run by crazy people, but that's why the movies were fun. But anyway, yeah, this is a canon picture.
So, knowing it was a canon picture, and then they start showing the gore, I was like, oh, that was very subdued. And that surprised me.
Well, another thing I thought is in a lot of ways, there's a lot of there's a lot of parts of the movie where you feel like you're watching a Hammer flick from, like, the 60s or 70s. I don't know if you got that feel,
no,
but there's and I mean, part of that's because Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee are in the movie, but just, like, the pacing, the kind of gothic feel to it, but the fact that there's still, like, blood kind of reminded me of the old Hammer horror flicks.
Yeah, it does have a 70s Hammer horror, a Hammer horror feel prior to the Hammer films becoming smut.
Right. Well, the weirdest thing, too, is just that Desi Arnaz Jr. is in this film.
So I looked into Desi Arnaz Jr., and he didn't do a whole lot.
Well, he didn't do a lot in the way of movies.
He did a lot of TV, which is fitting since if you guys don't know the name Desi Arnaz Jr., Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball
of I Love Lucy fame.
Of I Love Lucy, Ricky and Lucy, they were actually married, and this is their son.
So, which is so weird, because then he's mixed in with all of, like, these ancient, but, like, still incredibly, like, respected and iconic horror actors, and we should talk about them. We can't even begin to go in on what all of them have done, because unlike every episode up till now on this podcast, all of them had incredibly iconic careers, movies upon movies. Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing were the cornerstones
of the Hammer.
Yes. Between them, they've been Frankenstein, Dracula, Van Helsing, like... They always played almost guaranteed that if one was the good guy, the other was the bad guy, and it would switch.
Yeah, there were some exceptions to the rule, like Horror Express. They're on the same team, and I know there's more than just that one. And there should have been our main cue that Corrigan was actually the bad guy the whole time.
Because if one of them is on one side, the other has to kill him.
Exactly.
If you don't know them from that, though, you might know them from both of them would go on to star in Star Wars.
A little obscure thing called Star Wars.
Peter Cushing would play Grand Moff Tarkin in the original trilogy, and Christopher Lee would go on to be Count Dooku in the prequel trilogy. On top of that, he was also Saruman in Lord of the Rings.
I believe they both passed up on playing Loomis in Halloween, which is a very interesting coinky-dink. But this movie is also a case of, all right, you have those 4 superstars. Everyone else was pretty much like, I did British TV, or in the case of Desi Arnaz Jr.,
I did
TV,
American TV.
American TV, and like nobody did anything. It felt two of the actors were both in The Longest Day, but The Longest Day is a World War II ensemble piece with like 100 characters. So if you didn't recognize them from that movie, that's a very reasonable thing to not recognize them from.
And the thing is it's not really that large a cast though to begin with, because it's the 7 characters for most of the film.
Yeah.
And then you also, on top of our Hammer Horror alumni, you had Vincent Price. Look, if you've never seen a movie before, you'll know him as the spooky guy at the end of the Thriller song. But hopefully you're cultured enough that you know...
That you actually know him as the guy from the Alice Cooper song.
Okay, so aside from rubbing elbows with, musicians, he was one of the most iconic horror actors of especially the 50s and the 60s, in movies like The Fly, The Pit and the Pendulum, one of my personal favorites, House on Haunted Hill. He kind of carried horror on his shoulders for much of the 50s, and then our other friend John Carradine.
He's not actually, I think a lot of people think of him as a horror actor. He's not.
No, he did play a lot of villainous roles.
He's interesting. I'm not entirely sure what his hang-up was. I'm pretty sure that he had some sort of trouble in his personal life, especially since I believe he was married 4 times and had lots of
Premarital, or not premarital, extramarital
issues. There were a lot of problems. So I'm under the impression that he was always working, partly because he just absolutely had to always be working.
But he was a very good actor. He was in a lot of, I hate to call them legitimate films, because in my mind, horror films are legitimate films, but like mainstream...
Mm-hmm. Well, he was most notable originally at the start of his career for Westerns. Stagecoach, which is like, if you are interested in Western movies, like, you need to see Stagecoach. It's very just important. He plays the gambler in that movie. He played in tons of Westerns. And then as time moved on, he did have some legitimacy. I mean, he's Aaron in the 10 Commandments, which also has Vincent Price in it. And then later, as he got older, and I guess maybe his career started to decline, that's when the horror movies started up.
Well, and that's where I knew him from, because there were a lot of Dracula movies and movies with Dracula in Universal's heyday, but Bela Lugosi wasn't in most of them. He did show up in a lot of the Universal horror movies, but the other actor who was most associated with Dracula was John Carradine.
Yes.
He gets overshadowed a little bit because despite being in like House of Dracula and movies like that, he was just kind of always overshadowed by not being Bela Lugosi, at least in that role.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think pretty much every Dracula is overshadowed by Bela Lugosi to some extent.
And to be honest, I mean, those are some hard shoes to fill.
Early on, or earlier in his career, he did play Dracula in the 2 all monster meet-up movies.
Yes.
This is also a case with especially Lee and Cushing and Price. They're sort of just like a different breed of person you don't see anymore. They're multi-talented, like actual gentlemen of some sort of skill who have all sorts of interests. Like Peter Cushing, he was really into wargaming, which, as I've come to know, is actually quite a British hobby. But he would paint miniatures and play. H.G. Wells put out a set of rules for a tabletop wargame type thing.
The great granddaddy of Warhammer, Little Wars.
Here's the real question. Would Peter Cushing be a Warhammer 40K player?
I don't want to think about that.
I don't want to think about that either. But Cushing also wrote, and he was into ornithology, and he was a vegetarian and led his vegetarian-like club. Lee has a very impressive military service.
Was a Nazi hunter after World War II. Lord, we could do a podcast just on Christopher Lee. If any of you guys remember, I think they're still on, but there was this series of like iconic commercials where it was Dos Equis, and it was the most interesting man in the world, and it would have like random anecdotes of like crazy adventures he'd go on. Christopher Lee is the real most interesting man in the world.
He's like, and he can actually sword fight. He did all of his own stunts.
He had like a massive library with like occult books, and one of the things is too is he also has a metal album,
a Christmas metal album
that he put out in his 80s.
He just lived a very full and interesting life.
I believe he is a descendant of Charlemagne.
I believe that's also true. And then Vincent Price was super into art collection
and antique collecting. He would help pick out antiques to be put in a lot of, because he was in a lot of like gothic horror films, so he would get antiques and stuff for the period, and then he would like pick what he wanted at the end of the production and take it home.
Yeah, like the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies. Those were full of, period pieces, and Price would look around the set and decide what to take home with them. But he was, an art collector, and he also was a big cook. You can get Vincent Price cookbooks. He's got several. And I believe he also opened like one of the first like teaching art institute type things with a college. There's some college in California, I believe, has a little art section named after Vincent Price that I believe he helped start.
But yeah, to really just sum up the point, these were a cut above the rest. Real, like, the term gets thrown around a lot, but like actual like Renaissance men.
It really feels like today you don't see people with these sort of...
You don't see people with interest nowadays.
Yeah.
Look, I'm a boomer. Why are you young people who don't care nothing about it? But no, I don't know. They were all like patrons of the arts, but they were also like, they just really marched to the beat of their own drum and lived interesting lives.
That guy who was in a movie called House on Haunted Hill that had a skeleton on a string. Yeah, he was actually really smart and into all this different kind of art.
Now, if you ask me, the skeleton on the string is high art, and there will be coming an episode, probably not too terribly long from now, where we talk about it.
Now, John Carradine, I'm not sure about his pursuits, but John Carradine did give us David Carradine, who is like a king of B movies. Maybe not the king, but if you are into VHS movies that never saw a theater screen ever and were made for the budget of a ham sandwich.
Which, if you're listening to this podcast, you might.
You know who David Carradine is. Also, if you watch Red Letter Media, you are probably aware of many a mean-spirited joke. That's about it for our four amazing actors. And as we sort of mentioned earlier, that was the selling point of the movie.
And to this movie's credit, it's not like some movies where like they'll hype you up for an actor and then he'll be in for 10 minutes. Each actor gets plenty of time to shine and gets to put on their full cheese. Like, I say cheese, they're all really good actors, but this movie definitely does have a little bit of a cheese to it.
No, Vincent Price...
They're all here to chew scenery.
Vincent Price turns up the camp to 11 and like monologues, which is great. Peter Cushing probably has the most subdued, but for the type of roles that Peter Cushing plays, it's perfect. He does it well. He doesn't say a lot very well.
Well, I'll give this too for Peter Cushing. Out of all of them, he might have the most range as an actor.
Yes.
That's kind of a bold statement, and I feel free to disagree with me on that, but I will say, like, he can be very intimidating, he can play very malevolent characters, he can be, like in this movie, a very timid character. Peter Cushing is just believable in a lot of roles.
And then Christopher Lee is just he's always big and loud.
And forceful.
But not big and loud in an obnoxious way,
He's got presence.
He's got presence. And then again, going back, Desi Arnaz Jr., he's just so small compared to all of these amazing talents.
And he doesn't necessarily do a bad job, but, I mean, he mostly exists to react.
At the end of the movie, I was just like, man, I could have used more of, like, the big four. I also believe that the four actors might have been the only real selling point for this movie. I don't think this movie failed. I don't have the numbers, but I'm definitely under the impression that it was not well reviewed by critics, who were very obviously upset by the twist ending.
Well, I think I'm not sure if they're both in, but I think the twist was even in the play, and I think despite the fact it was very successful, it's always kind of given it a mixed reception with some of its adaptations, because it's not telegraphed, really. I mean, yes, me and Bones guessed it, but we pulled our guesses just out of thin air as a joke.
It was a monkey at the typewriter type situation. We could have shouted any number of twists. We just happened to land on the correct ones.
We thought of the two silliest possibilities, and I don't know, it really, I mean, I'm not saying I wouldn't rewatch this film, but it would definitely be a very different watch the second time, because you know that all of this drama that you're being drawn deeper and deeper into, in the context of the film, is not just not happening, but like double not happening. This is like a dream within a dream sequence.
There was twistception, if you will.
Right. So, and I don't know, I'm still a little conflicted. At some point, it's part of what makes the movie notable. But you know what? I would have really been just fine if they wanted to have left it as I say paint by numbers, but it really was kind of a fun murder mystery film, even without any of the silly twists.
I think some people forget that the most obvious thing is sometimes the best thing. Like, this movie didn't really need to be anything more than what it was up to, the ending.
Yeah, subverting expectations isn't always smart intelligence, and a lot of times in this case it wasn't very cathartic.
No, I kind of wanted Christopher Lee to just be dead at the end, or maybe Desi Arnaz to be dead at the end. I wanted somebody, either the good guy or the bad guy, to be dead at the end of the movie, and we end. And that's pretty much my thoughts on the ending, is they didn't need to switch things up. This movie,
I will give them this. If you got me once, I might have been, this was dumb. You get me two times and I'm like, well, now we have to talk about this. We needed to make this podcast. I don't know. We needed closure.
Yeah, and I feel like this movie, I liked it, but I can see people not liking it, or
feeling cheated.
Feeling cheated, or maybe just indifferent. But I think that there is an audience for this movie. This is a cult movie, and that there is a subset of people who probably really enjoy this.
Well, and I mean, like I said, when you've seen it all done before, sometimes it's nice to see something just different. If I was making this movie, would have had the double twist endings? No. It would most certainly not have. But at the same time, it was something different. It was something I hadn't seen before. If you're looking for a more standard murder horror type movie with any of these actors, you can find numerous examples for each of them. So, that being said, though, that kind of does explain why this movie with these four iconic actors isn't more well known.
Well, it's also with Canon, they are working typically with, they're not really making classy films.
No,
so
usually most of the budget goes into like a big name. I guess in this case it was four big names, and then usually the thing is, We'll just fill in the rest with whoever we can get and put in lots of explosions.
Yeah, because like I said,
There are no explosions in this film.
there are no explosions, but the actors who aren't the big names were mostly television actors. The director has pretty much done like low budget horror movies and sexploitation films, which is just a euphemism for softcore porn
Before the internet.
Yeah,
they were looking through, because I was kind of curious, and I was looking through what else he had made, and I'm just like, wow, there's not really much here to pick through that I'd want to see.
Not a lot you can sit down with the family and watch.
Right.
And I think the writer was also mostly just television writing. So the money definitely went into the actors, and I'm not sure what the money went into marketing or even like a theater distribution. I'm pretty sure it did get a theater distribution. I mean,
I can't imagine that they would put money into getting Christopher Lee and company and not just go to theater.
Well,
but I don't know.
Howling II did have Christopher Lee and most likely did not go to theater.
Yeah, Howling II had a lot of other things. That might be... I can't stomach it for next week. But one of these days... I'm sorry, guys. Every episode we talk about every other movie that we're going to talk about, but the world of cult cinema is a large and rich.
It's very beautiful.
We could do this forever.
So, I guess I have two last things.
Okay.
One, would you recommend this movie?
Yes, but with conditions, or I should say reservations. Look, you're going to get to see the 4 actors. You're going to get to see plenty of them. All of them are going to get their chance to choose scenery. If you are a big fan of any one of the 4, and if you're a fan of one of them, you're probably a fan of multiple, if not all 4. You should watch it. It's going to deliver in that way. Is this a fantastic film? No. And, I mean, if you've listened this far, you kind of already know how you're going to feel about it. Either the twist endings aren't going to bother you, or it's ruined for you. And if the whole concept of this being a staged production within a novel sounds stupid to you and ruins it for you, then it's not going to subvert your expectations in that way. You already know whether you're going to like this or not.
I would also recommend it. Like I said, it's a movie that I think it's probably not everybody's cup of tea, but there's definitely an audience for it out there.
And it definitely has good quality.
And yes, definitely has good qualities. I probably wouldn't watch it again soon, but it is a movie I would watch again at some point in my life.
Just to watch the people's reactions to it, really.
My final question, and the most important one. Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Vincent Price. Who's got the best widow's peak?
If we're judging purely on widow's peak, I'm gonna make a bold statement. I'm gonna say Peter Cushing.
See, I would say it's probably either Cushing or Lee. Lee because he's got the best natural widow's peak. This is how his hair normally is. Cushing has the best old guy, my hair is gone widow's peak.
It really aids, though, in his mad scientist vibe he gives in a lot of movies.
Yes, he looks super evil in Star Wars.
Right, and I think something would have been lost if he had a full head of hair in Star Wars.
Exactly. Well,
you forgot the other important question you should ask me, though.
Oh, what's that?
What are we doing next week?
Hey, segue. We should have some segue music. Totally not going to have it this episode, though. Not happening.
Nope.
So what are we? What are we watching next week?
Well, you liked Vincent Price, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
So I figure we're going to double dip into Vincent Price, and we're going to watch the movie that kind of launched his horror career, House of Wax.
I like that movie. That will have
not the Paris Hilton House of Wax.
Oh shucks, that's the one I wanted to watch. The Paris Hilton one. Well, I guess that's what we'll be watching. If you have made it to this ending point, thank you for listening, and it does help the video get seen if you. Well, I think it helps the video get seen. I have no clue how YouTube works.
I don't think they know us yet to hate us, but
I think, if you hit the like button and you hit the comment button, magic things will happen. Possibly. Maybe.
It will greatly improve your life. Actual results may vary.
7 days, good luck. But
if
no.
you believe in that kind of thing.
Thank you for listening. That's it for us. Goodbye.